I'm gonna aim it down just a bit. Can you put a shirt on? You know they're gonna see through the pixelation that you're not wearing a shirt, right?
Are you recording?
Yes. Hey, what's up everyone? Danny here. With AMD's third generation of Ryzen processors now released, there's a ton of excitement surrounding them, and it's for good reason because they're good products and they offer great value. In terms of new releases, we've also got the Navi graphics cards, and then on Nvidia's side, we have the RTX Supers. So there's a lot of shiny new hardware with better performance out there to tempt you all around. But if you're building a PC on a lower budget, let's say you're working with like $500 or less, most of these newer products will be out of reach, and it may be a while until they start hitting the used market or come down in price from the online retailers. But that's fine though, because we know that as newer products come out, the older ones that they're succeeding usually drop in price, and those older parts don't necessarily become obsolete. It's not like Gen 3 Ryzen dropped and then boom, Gen 1 is just completely useless, just like that. First gen Ryzen is actually still very relevant and is getting cheaper by the day, making it perfect for builders on stricter budgets. So in this video, I'm going to show you an example of what you can aim for if you're working with like $500 or less. Let's check it out. So let's go over the parts. I'll talk about what I specifically use for this build, but I'll also talk about alternative options and give you price ranges to aim for so that you don't have to look for the exact same parts that I used. Because when building on a stricter budget and deal hunting, whether it be for used or brand new parts, the options you'll have will always be a moving target, so you need to be flexible and knowledgeable about what alternatives you can use that'll serve the same purpose. This build is going to feature a Ryzen 5 1600. Right now, I think this is one of the best CPUs you can use if you're working with less than $500. With 6 cores and 12 threads and the ability to overclock, this versatile processor is well balanced to meet all your gaming, streaming, and content creation needs at a low price. If you're one of the lucky people that has access to a micro center, you can get these for as low as $80 brand new with a cooler. Plus, they have their amazing promotion of knocking off $30 when you pair it with a motherboard, so you can walk out of there with a processor and B450 board for around $130. Now, if you're like me though, and not blessed with a micro center nearby, then your best option is going to be look for them used on Craigslist, eBay, or any of the other used sites out there, and expect to pay around $75 for the processor alone. Most of the time you'll find them without a cooler, so you're going to need to grab one. And I'm using a CryoRig H7 that I picked up for $25, but for that much you can also get any of the following coolers, which will all perform pretty well at around the same price point. That'll make for a total of $100 for the CPU and cooler to aim for. And if you're really lucky, you might be able to score a Ryzen 5 2600 for that same price, since those have taken a price reduction as well. But for this build, I use a 1600, which is going to be more achievable for most people. For the motherboard, I used a Biostar X370 GT5. This is one of the more entry-level X370 boards. The VRMs aren't the greatest, and the board actually has overclocking performance more on par with B350s compared to other 370 boards. I bought it for $50 brand new on Newegg through eBay, and that's about how much you should look to spend for an AM4 motherboard that has decent overclocking capabilities. I don't expect you to find any X370 or X470 boards that are as cheap as what I got mine for, since that was kind of an uncommon deal. So instead, what you should aim for is the more affordable and common B450, since there's also going to be a higher chance of it being compatible long term with future AM4 product releases. But if you can't find any B450s, then B350s will also work, since a lot of them do support up to Ryzen Gen 3. If you want to leave yourself some upgrading headroom for the future, just be sure to look up the manufacturer's website for compatibility of the specific board you're considering before you buy it. For graphics, I'm using the EVGA GTX 1060 3GB for the Win Edition. A lot of people don't like this card because of the low amount of VRAM, but I think for the right price, anything can be worth it. And I use this because it's what I had readily available, and I got it for $80, which is a pretty common price for it. If you can, try to shoot for the 6GB version, or you can alternatively go with AMD's RX 480 or 580 in either the 4 or 8GB variants. This is where flexibility comes in, because depending on what card and VRAM capacity you can find at different prices, you're going to have to make the choice as to what will suit your needs and make sure it fits within your build budget. I'd allocate around $90 for any of these graphics cards though. For RAM, I'm using a kit of 16GB Corsair Vengeance LPX at 2400 MHz, which I'll be overclocking to 2666, and I got this kit for 50 bucks. We're at an all-time low for RAM prices right now. You can get a kit of 3000 MHz RAM for around $60 brand new, so you should be able to find RAM for around $50 in the used market. If you're running Ryzen, most advice you'll see online is to get the highest clock speed that you can due to AMD's Infinity Fabric, and I would recommend that as well. I would say try to push for 3000 MHz if you can, but if you can only get your hands on kits that are a couple rungs lower than that, like how I did, then don't sweat it. It won't be the end of the world and your build will be just fine. Aim for 3000, but 2666 and I think 2400 will work just fine. For storage, I'd recommend getting a combo of a solid-state boot drive alongside a larger mechanical storage drive. 120GB SSDs will run you around $20, but you can get double that capacity for only $30 with the price of the flash storage we've been seeing, and that's brand new. I'd recommend getting at least 240GB if you can, which is what I'm using for this build. I grabbed an Inland Professional drive, which is Micro Center's in-house brand, for 30 bucks, but most other brands will be around this price and will work perfectly fine. Alongside the SSD, you're going to want a mass storage drive for all your games and large files, and I'd recommend at least a 1TB 7200 RPM drive, which will run you around $30 for a brand new white label drive on eBay. So spending a total of $60 on storage should have you set for a while, and if you eventually do run out of space, you can always add additional storage later with minimal effort. For the power supply, I'm using an EVGA 600W 80 Plus white label. This specific unit is a longtime favorite of not only my channel, but a lot of other budget builders out there, and they only cost $20 from EVGA B-Stock sales. This is a refurbished product backed by a 1-year warranty, and I've used a lot of these power supplies across many of the builds that I've done on the channel because of how much value they offer. I'd suggest going with EVGA B-Stock or finding something local, otherwise you're going to be spending like double to triple the amount on something equivalent on Newegg or Amazon. Housing all the components will be the Matrix 55 from Deepcool, who actually sent over this case to be featured in this build. This case starts at $40 and has been highly praised as a very good low-cost tempered glass option by a lot of reviewers. If you're wondering why it's priced so cheap, it's because they did cut some corners, like with these breakaway expansion covers, as well as the lack of grommets on the cable holes. The cheapest option comes with no fan and no power supply shroud, and the light strip on the front only supports 12V RGB headers. Deepcool also sells an updated version of this case that supports 5V addressable RGB and includes 3 addressable RGB fans, and it has a power supply shroud for 80 bucks, which is pretty much the average cost of buying any decent case and a pack of RGB fans these days. I think this case looks great. It has a ton of room to work in and is really easy to achieve clean cable management. But like most front tempered glass cases, you're going to be sacrificing some airflow. But because we're not running any high-end hardware or pushing some extreme overclocks in this build, the temps are going to remain reasonable. So now let's take a look at the part list and price summary. If you follow a similar build to what I just presented, you should come in right around the $450 mark. Do keep in mind that I did budget quite a bit for the case and fans in this build, and that assumes that you're going to be carrying them over for multiple build cycles, which kind of helps make it more justifiable to spend a bit more, especially if you're someone who cares about aesthetics. But on the other hand, if you're a person who doesn't care about looks or a nice case at all and just want to go for raw performance for as cheap as possible, you can definitely go for something like a $30 super budget option that already includes some very basic fans, and then that alone will push the total down to the $400 price point. And all the prices I stated in this guide were what I would expect to pay with some moderate searching and does not include any crazy once-in-a-lifetime deals. While I do encourage people to find deals like that, I wanted to cater this guide to people who may not be as experienced in deal hunting. So definitely make minor adjustments to this guide depending on your situation and how good of a deal hunter you think you are. You could push it lower or, bump it a little bit up closer to $500. Now let's talk about the assembly. As stated earlier, the Deepcool Matrix 55 is very easy to build in. I had no problems with it and the whole build sequence was fairly standard. Even without the power supply shroud, the cable management was super easy as there was plenty of room in the back panel to tidy everything up. One thing to note though is that you can install the fans one of two ways in this case. You can install them in front of the bracket, which looks better, but it pushes them up really close to the glass panel and limits how much air can get through. Or you can mount them behind the bracket to get more clearance for airflow. I personally went for the more airflow route since I don't think it looks that bad, but it's really up to your own taste. I have a video of the entire build sequence from start to finish that should be uploaded either a little bit before or after this video goes live, so definitely look for that in the title card and the description if you want to see the whole PC being built. But here it is, the final build. Now let's take a look at the performance. For overclocking, I've got the Ryzen 1600 running at 4 GHz. The GTX 1060 has a 50 MHz increase on the core clock and a 200 MHz increase on the memory. And the 16 GB of RAM is overclocked to 2666 MHz. All the games were tested in 1080p because this hardware and price point can't quite comfortably push into the 1440p territory except for like the older or lighter titles. So that's why I stuck to 1080p. But yeah, with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the benchmarks. So those were the benchmarks. What you just saw should actually represent the lowest performance you can expect out of my recommendations of parts, because I used the 3GB variant of the GTX 1060 and my RAM was binned at 2400 MHz, overclocked to 2666. If you are liking the numbers that were seen during the benchmarking sequence, then you'll definitely like the numbers you'll see if you built something similar and are able to squeeze in one of the slightly better graphics card that I mentioned earlier, and if you can get some slightly higher frequency RAM. Those two things are going to net you around a 5 to 10% better performance than what you just saw. But yeah, that about wraps it up for this video. Let me know what your thoughts are of the build down below in the comment section, and while you're down there, also let me know if you're one of the types of people who are always rocking the newest and latest hardware when it first comes out, or if you're one to go straight to the stuff that's like a generation or two old to rack up on the savings. I want to thank Deepcool for sending over the Matrix 55 and RGB fans to be featured in this build, and I of course want to thank all of you out there, as always, for watching my content and for supporting the channel continually. I really do appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed the video, hope you found it helpful, and I will see you all down in the comments, as well as in the next one. Bye.